Good afternoon. Welcome back to another edition of NCIA's Industry Essentials Educational Webinars. For those of you tuning in for the first time, our Industry Essentials webinar series is NCIA's premier digital educational platform featuring a variety of interactive programming, all designed to provide you timely, engaging, and essential education when and where your team needs it most. My name is Brian Gilbert, the Deputy Director of Events and Education here at NCIA, and I'm very thrilled to kick off another episode of our premier member-driven educational experience with this interactive program inside of our Committee Insights series today. Today, our multi-part series of novel, minor, and synthetic cannabinoids finally continues. In our second part of this five-part series entitled Meet the Minors, we'll be joined by members of NCIA's Cannabis Manufacturing, Scientific Advisory, and Hemp Committees for an in-depth discussion of the most talked about minor, novel, and synthetic cannabinoids. What scientific publications exist for each compound? What do we know about each molecule's physiological, psychoactive, and therapeutic effects? Well, we'll all find out together live with these leading chemical experts, manufacturers, intellectual property attorneys, and product development specialists as they explore these compounds from various perspectives to examine their implications for consumers, medical practitioners, patients, producers, and regulators. All right. Well, enough with this intro. Let's get things started in earnest. To kick things off, I'd like to welcome our moderator for today's program, Scott Seeley. Scott's an intellectual property attorney and registered patent attorney with Eastgate IP, as well as the current vice chair of NCIA's Cannabis Manufacturing Committee. He'll be joining us to kick off the conversation and lead the panelists through some personal bios before diving right into the program. I know a lot of you all probably recognize Scott as well as a fellow panelist, James, from the introductory session that kicked off this series in late November. And then we also have a number of panelists joining us from the introductory session, defining the conversation that took place in mid-December as well. So with that, Scott, you can activate your video feed, and James, Casson, and John, if you wanted to do the same right now, we can get this party started.
Awesome. Well, thanks. Hey, everybody. I'm excited to talk with you all today for part 2 of our minor, novel, and synthetic cannabinoid webinar series. Today's session, as James said, is going to be Meet the Minors, where we'll be identifying some of the lesser known cannabinoids, as well as talking about what we know about some of the physiological, psychoactive, and potentially therapeutic effects some of these molecules may have. We'll briefly talk about some of the terms commonly used to classify these compounds and the subjective effects they produce. We'll also discuss some of the nuances that might be left out when we distill these compounds down to only 2 buckets of simply intoxicating versus non-intoxicating. We're also going to take a look at some of the molecular structures of these compounds to discuss how closely related these compounds are to one another and how common structural elements can inform the function of these cannabinoids. Finally, we'll close with a discussion of the synergy that exists between the hemp and cannabis industry in promoting and commercializing these compounds, and talk about some of the things these industries can do to bolster one another. So as James said, my name is Scott Seeley. I'm an intellectual property attorney with Eastgate IP. I have a background in biochemistry, and my practice specializes primarily in helping my clients obtain patents and trademarks to protect their research and branding. Today's panel, we have John Murray. John is a vice chair of the Hemp Committee and a serial entrepreneur who serves as the president and founder of Sustainable Innovations, along with its retail brand Buckbee Weed Company. Located in Rockford, Illinois, the company is socially equity-based, holds a certification as a small disabled minority business, and is vertically integrated in both hemp and cannabis. We also have Casson today with us. Casson studied chemistry at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. Casson has over 15 years of experience with the best practices in the pharmaceutical industry and has come to cannabis to help keep patients and consumers safe by putting those best practices to work towards a standardized sampling and testing system in the industry. Casson is vice chair of the Scientific Advisory Committee for the NCIA and founder of Casson Consulting LLC, where Casson has been building compliant CGMP facilities across the country for licensed cannabis endeavors. Finally, we have James Granger. James is the founder of New Science LLC and has provided consulting for multiple extraction and refinement labs. James has served on the Senate Bill 205 Intoxicating Hemp Task Force as a cannabis science expert focusing on public health and safety. He's also one of the founders and scientific directors for Jet Cannabis, a cutting-edge CO2 extraction brand. James has helped design and build multiple labs, including Seed and Smith Cannabis, an award-winning facility producing high volumes of hydrocarbon, CO2, and distillate extract products. Great. So let's start with our first topic, discussing some of these lesser talked about minor cannabinoids, their properties, and why consumers might be interested in these compounds. So Caston, would you like to start us off and expand on these two main overarching classes of generally intoxicating THC type compounds and generally non-intoxicating CBD type compounds, and tell us about some of the noteworthy minors that we should also be on the lookout for?
Yeah, I would love to. Brian, do you think we could share the slide? Yay. Oh, I love it when we have Venn diagrams and they work. So the broader categories here of we think they might be not intoxicating, we think they might be intoxicating, really have a lot of things inside of them. A lot of the new compounds, we really don't know, right? It may be that they might be intoxicating, but we haven't used them in combination with other compounds enough to really figure that out. And it may also be that they're really minors. We only get them in such small quantities that we haven't experienced a dose that actually gets us where we might be trying to go. I look at that when you consider that, some people will consume, 1 or 2 milligrams of Delta-9 THC and experience nothing at all. But give them 50 milligrams of Delta-9 THC and they're like on the floor or sleeping or having a really excellent trip to another planet. Right? Like the fact is for some of these compounds, we really don't know yet, right? That's why we're talking about these minor, novel, and synthetic cannabinoids today. When I put these diagrams together, I felt like it's easy for me to just throw things in buckets, okay? And be like, this is intoxicating because one time somebody got high from consuming it that one time, right? Regardless of what else they were consuming at the time, right? Or, that's not intoxicating because I've consumed a lot of that and I never once got high, okay? Or really a lot of the we don't knows, which for me, sometimes the we don't knows are the thousands of compounds that we don't even know exist yet, but that this plant actually has, right? So there's so much space there. At the same time, there's a lot of other space, right? Are these CB1 antagonists? Do they not bind at all with CB1? Are they CB2? Do they have a completely different protein that they're binding with in our bodies? There are different enzymatic pathways. Are the methods of consumption different, right? There are plenty of things that if you tried to inhale them, you're not going to get any experiences at all, or if you use them in a topical dosage form, for instance, right? So there are so many different buckets that we can place these things in. I created another bucket here beyond the intoxicating and not intoxicating, which I like to call extracted, converted, or synthetic, because I think sometimes people forget that there are a lot of cannabinoids out there that are fully synthetic. And they've been around for a long time. People have been making these, these are well-known molecules, right? They are used in clinical settings in some cases, right? As well as there are plenty of ways to make compounds at this point, especially things like Delta-9 THC, whether you're getting it from a plant, you're converting it from something else that came from the plant, or you're literally creating it out of dinosaurs from the petroleum industry. And all of those things are actually possible, right? So if we want, we can start really moving the same molecule into lots of different buckets. So Delta-9 THC could literally be in the not intoxicating bucket if it's in a low dose in a topical that somebody's putting on their elbow, right? At the same time that it could be in an intoxicating bucket if somebody is consuming it in an edible, or in an intoxicating bucket if somebody is, inhaling it, right? And there could be new forms, right? So like, for instance, now, we're getting a lot of research about suppositories, and we're getting research about like direct injected substances. If those things happened, are those methods going to cause intoxication? So for instance, is an intramuscular injection of THC in a tumor intoxicating? The answer is we don't know, right? So the buckets really can kind of go everywhere. And that is the most exciting part about doing research and work in this industry. And I feel like, Scott, that John can speak a bit to that, because I know he has created or isolated and utilized so many of these compounds in his practice, and could probably talk a bit about, we could start putting things in buckets to say, hey, does this have anti-inflammatory abilities? Hey, is this going to help with anxiety? hey, have we seen that this, causes sleepiness or drowsiness, right? Hey, have we seen that this increases your appetite, right? Or, hey, on the flip side, does it also decrease appetite, or does it do both, right? We all know about things like the munchies, right? But what about appetite suppression, right? Like these buckets for where these cannabinoids land are so vast that really we could just keep throwing up Venn diagrams all day and say, hey, do we know, do we not know? What have we seen, and be able to pull on clinical research and, academic research that's been happening for the last, 150 years, right? Some of the first publications are in the early 1900s on cannabis, right? 1880s, people were talking about cannabis and using it in medicinal ways, right? 1940s, they're isolating specific compounds, right? So, we could really get into the nitty gritty if we wanted to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see Darwin has posted in chat. The ASTM technical subcommittee is standardizing, well, they're at least working on ways to define whether a cannabinoid solicits intoxicating effects. And I think that's a very powerful tool, and we should all be aware of that. Within the industry, there's going to be a myriad of different compounds that have different effects. And I think there's certainly a place, especially from a regulatory perspective, to have one definite concrete method to determine whether something falls into an intoxicating or a non-intoxicating bucket. But I think it's also useful from a consumer's perspective and an industry perspective to have a slightly more nuanced understanding of the interplay between some of these compounds and how we can talk about things in terms beyond just intoxicating versus non-intoxicating. Although that might be less helpful from a regulatory standpoint, I think it could be helpful for a consumer and matureness of the industry standpoint. So awesome, Caslin. I think that was super helpful. So kind of moving on from the general overarching buckets, are there specific compounds within these buckets that we should be on the lookout for?
I think that we should 100% be on the lookout for how these buckets impact our businesses and our ability to work together across industries, especially when we start talking about things like making consumer products, the kinds of consumer products we're trying to make, and the kind of labeling that we want to use for those consumer products, so that we can communicate to consumers, hey, this is what you're getting into. Just last week, I was able to talk with a great group of doctors about, hey, what if a compound contains, milligrams of THC, but you were expecting it to be a CBD CBG product, for instance, right? So, the CBD CBG product might not actually get you intoxicated, but your experience of the product because of an impurity might be different, right? So that then comes back to us being able to have that broader conversation of, is it intentional intoxication versus unintentional intoxication? Is it intoxication because you're actually taking other products, right? So like, for instance, if you're taking a warfarin and all of a sudden you're really dizzy and you're feeling imbalance, which might be a symptom of intoxication, but you didn't actually take an intoxicating cannabinoid, but now you're experiencing feelings of intoxication. Does that mean that the product is now causing intoxication, right? I don't know that answer to that question is yes, right? That's why, as Darwin said, we're all working to make those definitions of those buckets, right? And if it's always a dosage form that's, being used externally, I'm rubbing my CBD ointment on my skin, right? Is it CBG ointment? Is that helping, right? Is it THCV? Is it helping? Right? I don't know anybody who's like, let me get some THC acetate or some HHC and rub it on my skin. But do we know what would happen if we did? Right? Is your skin going to absorb it? Is it going to get into your bloodstream? If it got it, is that possible? Right? So there are so many questions about these buckets that we could start placing things in. And I really feel like the broader thing is, what are our consumers interested in? Right? If my grandma is only interested in something she can rub on her hands when she's knitting that makes it so she can knit longer, as long as she's not really intoxicated, right? Like, great. Or maybe she really would prefer that she rubs some ointment on her hands and gets intoxicated and continues knitting, right? Like, what are they actually asking for? 5 years ago, somebody was like, we want to put CBD in water. And I was like, what? Why would you want to put CBD in water? Water's water. Water's good all on its own, right? Like maybe in like some kind of cocktail or something, right? And now there's hundreds of beverages that are out there that have cannabinoids in them, right? So, there's so many different buckets that we could place things in. And for me, the idea is, how can we do it safely, notifying the consumer of what, the potential risks, while also like really feeling those synergies of this plant is sacred and wonderful, and there's so much that we can get out of it. And maybe also considering that there are perhaps bad actors in the industry, not us, right? We're here, we're talking about it openly, but the ones that really don't care, right? The guys that are like, I'm going to give you a gummy and it's going to have 1,000 milligrams of THC in it. Yeah. I don't know who would want to eat that gummy, but I'm sure that consumer exists. Okay. I never thought I'd find a person who was like, let me drink 200 milligrams in like a 1 ounce shot before. I've met them now. Those people exist. So just throwing it out there. There's so many buckets, because maybe the intoxicating bucket is totally blitzed out of your mind, a little bit high, your body is feeling it, or you don't really feel it at all, right? Like maybe that bucket isn't even just 3 buckets any longer. Maybe it's actually 7 buckets, and there's variations of highness.
Awesome. Well, with some of those buckets kind of set forward, Cassie, would you like to talk about some of the specific molecules that we are finding in these buckets? So for example, I think we're all generally aware of THC, but there's other molecules that are structurally similar, but found in much lower quantities, or not even found at all and need to be synthesized. Do you want to draw some attention to some of these specifically?
If we stay here just for a moment on D9, right? So we can kind of see the change in the molecule is very simple. All we're doing is removing this carboxyl group, okay? And all of a sudden now we have delta 9 THC from THCA. If we can go to the next slide. In this case, you can see this circle over here on the left. Like this is the only difference between delta 8 and delta 9 THC, right? We have a lot of really excellent research on the intoxicating effects of delta 8 and some other items regarding like what the level of intoxication is based on a dosage, right? We act like it's novel, but this research started in the 1940s, right? So we can really look and say, hey, wow, there's so much more. And if we go to the next slide, we can talk about, hey, well, what about this THCO acetate? How long has that been around? How long have we been considering this product? Is this a product that we should be inhaling? Is this a product that is super new and novel? Well, we could say yes, but the research on this product actually started in the 1940s as well, right? With intense categorization and segregation of this product in the 1970s, okay? And extensive preclinical toxicology research in the 1990s. Like we're talking a level of research for this molecule that is even beyond the delta 9 THC molecule, which I find surprising. And what I really wonder is why all of the extra effort on this one molecule? And I would say because it gets you so much higher, which then goes back to those buckets we were talking about earlier, where is it intoxicating? Sure, but there are varying degrees of intoxication. And what does that intoxication signify, right? So there's so much there. But what about those things that aren't actually THC any longer? If we could go to the next slide. Right. So now we've got these hexahydrocannabinoids, okay, where we've really have hydrogenated the molecule, and we've taken away these double bonds. This is, again, the only difference is how that benzene ring is performing, right? And yet we know that this molecule is different in our bodies, right? We started doing this research in the 1960s, right? We have excellent research in the early 2000s, really covering this, and some other synthetics that are very similar to this, right? And these molecules, becoming more mainstream, right? As, the Farm Bill of 2018 allowed hemp to be more present, right? As we've seen legalization kind of other places, right? So all of these things, really not things that you can find in the plant. And then you fast forward one more slide. Thank you. Sorry. Love my slides. I'm feeling very good about it today, right? Now we're talking about CBG, like potentially the precursor of all other plant-based cannabinoids, okay? These phytocannabinoids all coming from this. Again, starting excellent research in the 60s. Fast forward to today. Earlier this year, people made a way to make CBG in non-cannabis plants, Okay, we've now seen CBG be able to be produced in plants that are similar to rice. We've seen CBG be able to be produced on tobacco leaves. Like the GMO possibilities of producing cannabinoids outside of a marijuana plant, with quotes around it, are phenomenal. With excellent research regarding, hey, is this an intoxicating compound or not? While also covering, hey, is this actually, an antagonist for THC, where if you have CBG present with your THC, are you now going to get more high? Are the other cannabinoids going to work better because you have the presence of this molecule? And this molecule is readily available in plants, readily available in hemp plants that can be produced, legally in all 50 states, if I recall correctly, plus and lots of countries around the world at this point. Without necessarily the risks of all of the tetrahydral cannabinoids that are out there. I feel like the next slide is important as well, because here is a compound that actually is in all three of the buckets: extracted, converted, and synthesized, with documentation of all of these practices going back to the 1940s. And at this point, this specific molecule is so amazing that we figured out how to do it using bioreactors, okay? Using enzymes and proteins out of other animals, right? To create and take this molecule to create this molecule from different precursors that are starting it, right? While also saying, hey, is this intoxicating or not intoxicating? Well, it might not be intoxicating if you're thinking intoxication only means that you're getting high. But if you think, hey, it's going to make you sleepy, you might be intoxicated when you're consuming CBN, right? So again, the buckets are just so wide and variable with everything we have with all of these compounds, right? And I only selected 3 fully synthetics and 3 come from the plant products, right? And there are thousands, right? And there are hundreds of other synthetics and biosimilars out there, right? And we have been doing so much research on these for so long, but some of the research we haven't really done are things like drug-to-drug interactions. We haven't looked at how these cannabinoids interact with each other in the plant. We haven't looked at different dosage forms, so like the difference between suppositories and oral. We haven't looked at, hey, is it coming out in your stomach, or is it coming out in your small intestine, right? Or is it coming out in your colon? Like, we haven't really done that level of research yet. I'm not entirely sure why, considering that we've been doing it for 80 years, but it just seems like those were things that people weren't terribly interested in. But now we are doing it. We're making those products. We're getting the preclinical trial information out. We're starting to do the toxicology work, right? We have producers of these products that now care about, hey, does my consumer like this? And what do they like? What does this taste like? I feel like sometimes the most basic things, does this smell good? Does this taste good, right? Does this give you indigestion, right? Does this cause heartburn? People don't think about that stuff until you actually have consumers that are readily consuming the product, right? And not behind closed doors, right? And I really feel like that's the synergy between all of the marketplaces, right? You have an established, hey, here's a cannabis consumer who is interested in, weed for whatever reason, right? They want to get high, they want to sleep at night, they want their back pain to go away, they're in a social setting and it's just what everyone else is doing, whatever. And now we have all of these other cannabinoids that are available to us on commercial scale that we can start looking at, okay, well, what about all the other cool things we could do? What if we add just a little bit of THCV to your product and now you no longer get the munchies? Wow. Okay. And I really feel like that's where John and James can really bring the fire to the conversation.
Yeah. Well, great points, Casson. I think Casson's done a great job of kind of explaining some of these minor cannabinoids. Sometimes it can be overwhelming looking at the long list of different cannabinoids that are out there. And I do think it can be helpful, as Casson was saying, to look at kind of the structure. So for example, there's a lot of commonality between these different compounds. So for example, CBDA and THCA are both just going to be the carboxylic acid forms that are generally less active. Similarly, you'll often see like THCV and CBDV, and the V usually designates a shortened side chain, and those are generally less active. And kind of going back to the intoxicating versus non-intoxicating buckets, and I see a question in the chat about kind of the entourage effects. there can be interplay between these compounds. So for example, if you dose somebody up on THC and then start giving them THCV, the THCV can competitively bind with that same receptor and reduce the effects. And I think that is a nuance that we can talk about. So with some of those compounds identified, James, would you like to help us get a better understanding of some of the potential that we're looking at? So for example, are there certain compounds that seem more economically viable than others at this early stage? And what kind of products do you envision these compounds being incorporated into that consumers might be interested in using these for?
Well, in a general sense, we've been consuming cannabis for thousands of years, and we never had these compounds isolated. Let's put it that way. We're used to a full synergistic plant compounds, and each plant having their own unique properties, has allowed the different effects. And luckily, we've taken this apart now and broken it down and really looked at what each of these things are doing. That's taken a lot of research, started like Casson said in the 40s and continuing on now. As a manufacturer, as well as someone who's focused on the public health and safety of this plant, moving forward and moving into this newer, what could be classified almost as a new frontier of cannabis. We've gone through cannabinoid alterations and synthetic processes before around the K2 and spice thing. Now, I'm not equating that to where we are now. It's a different bag of tricks, essentially. But what we're looking at is a chance, an opportunity to highlight these individual compounds in a safe way. And, this isn't really the forum for regulatory structure conversation, but making sure that we're doing this with the public eye to safety. So with that being said, in terms of manufacturing, we do see a massive benefit around producing products that contain higher levels of these cannabinoids for all sorts of varying things, and some that we're yet to discover through this newer research. Right now, of course, as what many people have well known, CBN, Casson's favorite molecule, is very much marketed right now towards sleep products, or increasing the amount of product that goes to sleep. CBC, CBG for focus, and those type of things. We see those as a really concrete way to, at least now, to start with creating at least edible products. I believe there is an angle that we need to study. And as a vaporizer company that does vaporizer manufacturing, studies do need to be done about vaporizing some of these substances on a mass scale. Producing products as a responsible industry, it is on us to make sure that we're not using our customers as guinea pigs. We need to be doing the research. We need to be starting reasonable, and we need to be addressing these issues before we go releasing combinations of THCP, JD, CHC, and all into a mixed cart bag and saying, vaporize this at whatever temperature you feel like it. Because now we're seeing data that even vaporization in terms of product heating ranges can affect what compounds are produced after the fact. So starting with a knowledgeable base and a directional focus on what are cannabis consumers looking for? What are they asking for? And a lot of that seems to be the variation of what they were finding with cannabis products. Like, this one strain helped me sleep. Okay, then we'll create products that will drive down that sleep route with cannabinoids. And honestly, there is a point where, as a scientist, working towards, there's financial viability, as you said, Scott. We're never going to grow a plant that has enough THCV to be financially viable to extract and refine just the THCV. Therefore, we are converting molecules from other sources, from bioorganic sources, from CBD is a common one right now. It's just commonality. What we need to be careful on is making sure that as we produce those, we're producing those in a safe environment. To Elena's note on, I believe, the chat, was identifying byproduct compounds. That's a lot of testing, and I know Elena, you're an absolute expert on the testing side of things, and I love the research you're doing and working there. With those things in mind, and knowing our historical precedent of cannabis, the plant, and what we've been smoking, eating, extracting for so many years, we are now just taking the best elements of that. We're taking those and making them to the best of our abilities. To Casson's point, they're making them with the absolute top end of GMP compliance and cleanliness and testing, tip to tail. And that's going to really help us develop new products. And that'll lead us later to the synergy conversation. But that'll be my 2 cents on that piece.
Awesome. And John, I know we're going to circle back on this a little bit later, but has your experience been similar with James? Have you been seeing an increase in consumer interest for these kinds of compounds? Oh, you're still muted, John.
Absolutely. My favorite part of the business is actually, consumer facing, because the entire cannabis or hemp industry, we're in the customer service business, right? I mean, that we're serving customers at the end of the day. And so the products that we create and manufacture ultimately, lends itself to a customer experience of some sort. And, then it's up to us to really help, kind of figure out what some of these effects may be. Right. So it's super interesting. The hemp side is a little more aggressive than the cannabis side, just because it has less regulation. So it's a lot more free to fail and fail fast and to create, and a lot more R&D is going in that. I mean, save the almost 100 years we've already been researching this plant. There's a lot of research that's being done on the hemp side for sure. And so, I mean, we're finding that customers are just coming in and they're generally looking for only 4 things. They're looking for pain relief. They're looking for something to help them sleep. They're looking for something to help them stay awake and energize them, or they're looking for something intoxicating, right? I mean, like, if you can generally categorize, those are the 4 things that most people are looking for. And so it's interesting. We've spent time isolating, and really through a lot of conversions on the hemp side. We have CBC, CBG, CBD, CBN, THCV, Delta 8 and Delta 9 THCs. And really consumers are looking for these molecules now. So it seems like people might not know about them, but consumers are coming in and asking for them. And again, it's really effect driven based on their own research and what they hear about, and they come in, and then what their own personal experience is. Again, they come in, and if somebody's looking to stay awake or to be focused, certainly they're coming in and asking for a drink or an edible with CBC or THCV in it, or both. And they might even mix that with a hot or cold coffee or tea, right? So, I mean, that's really going to give them a jolt, moving forward. And then, likewise, if they're looking for something to mellow them out, or they're looking for pain relief, you're right up with, well, really, most of them do have the potential of some sort of pain relief, but, they might come in for more of the CBD or CBN, depending on if they want to sleep. And even like a Delta 8, for example, that kind of hits both CB1 and CB2 receptors. So it's a lot less, it's more mild on the psychoactive piece, but it still gives more of that pain relief on the body, right? So a lot of people find that from a functional standpoint, and this is through comments and from most of our customers. So we really try to monitor and track that, and really I see the industry at some point becoming so savvy that it's going to be almost like a choose your own adventure, right? Like, you might have 4 or 5 people coming into a store, and they're all looking for different things, right? And at some point, I think they're going to be able to get these things. But one thing we're not talking about in this on this series, but is very important, is terpenes, right? So if the cannabinoids are like the car, the terpenes are very much the steering wheel, and we actually offer those to consumers too in an isolated, water soluble form. So in addition to if somebody's looking for maybe something more at nighttime to relax, the cannabinoids they might choose would be a CBG or a CBD, maybe mixed with a CBN, and then they might want like a myrcene or a carotene along with that, because that has very, sedative, anti-inflammatory, sleep aid type of properties. And, maybe if they're looking to stay awake and focus and be energized, then maybe you're looking at more of a pinene, terpene mixed with, again, that THCV or the CBC. So just really interesting how this is playing out, and I'm super excited to see the future of this as more research continues, clinical studies and trials continue, and just really people just get their hands on a lot of these isolated forms. But I do want to agree with James that land race is king, right? Just the plant in its purest form, unadulterated by man, right, is just pretty much the king of all plants, at least in my opinion. So.
Awesome. Yeah, I think it's it's really good to hit back on the terpenes and flavonoids. And I think that very neatly fits back into a nuanced understanding of the effects that these have. And it's not always just about the one molecule, it's about the synergistic effects that these multiple molecules can have. You also talked a little bit about the science and how far the science has gone. Cass, and I know this is one of your favorite topics. What kind of information exists for these molecules? Has it been stunted lately? Where is this information coming from? How well understood are these compounds? Are there new compounds still waiting to be discovered?
There are 100% new compounds still waiting to be discovered. We have new plants. I like to call them GMO plants, but I know people are like, that's not the truth. But really, guys, at this point in our industry, people are genetically modifying these plants to do different things, to be drought resistant, to be resistant to lots of pests and diseases and whatnot, right? So we are seeing that. And we're definitely seeing breeders selectively breeding for specific things. So specifically, breeding to remove THC, breeding to produce more THCV, breeding to produce more CBG with, throughout the plant's auto-flowering life cycle and those kinds of things, right? So those things are happening. As those things happen, we are adding even more new compounds, right? As we start treating the plants with different food sources, we're seeing completely new profiles inside the plants. We are barely touching the surface for all of the gums, lipids, and sugars that we see in the plant beyond the cannabinoids that we're looking at, right? And how those things are interacting when you're getting the different properties for inflammation or anti-inflammation and those kinds of things, right? Are we doing the research? 100% we are. Have we been doing the research for decades? 100% we have. Right? Have we been doing the research on commercial consumer product production? We haven't, right? And the reason we haven't is because until 5 years ago, that was off limits at the federal level, right? The risk to operators to try to start commercializing products was just not something people were interested in doing usually. I mean, there were some traditional market operators out there that were pushing the envelope, but in general, most companies weren't interested in spending the dollars, the millions and millions and millions of dollars to do the kind of toxicology research that's necessary to allow, overall commercialization of these products, right? We are seeing that work now, right? We just saw some amazing work on CBD and CBN come out of California. It was a 5-year clinical trial, right? Amazing work that nobody had really ever done before, using isolates versus non-isolates and showing the difference between, a full spectrum plant extract versus an isolate, right? And what do those differences look like? And what are the, dosage profiles? Right, so we definitely are seeing that kind of work now. I feel like the broader question is, how much more do we have to go? And I feel like we got that question from Alina, where she asked, shouldn't we perform pharmacology and toxicology studies of all these synthetic and converted cannabinoids by themselves in combination with other cannabinoids, especially since most products now contain more than one? And the answer is yes, right? In general, the research that we've done up until now has been isolated compounds, mostly in mice and monkeys, right? Where we're looking for just like general LD50, is this going to kill someone, yes or no? As an isolate, right? Not as anything where you were creating an ensemble, right? So, when John's talking about, adding these terpene mixes in to get specific effects and mixing two different isolates together to like arrive at a certain outcome, like the level of research that we've done there is very anecdotal at this point, right? It's like we're a new industry, we're trying these things, there's limited regulation that allows us to be very flexible, while at the same time, the research is starting to happen, right? We're seeing it in the academic sphere, for instance, the impurities of Delta-8 have been studied. I just saw a research study that just came out of the University of Mississippi this past week. Thank you, Alina, for sharing that. And it really kind of covers, hey, here's all the other stuff that we're seeing, right? Now, as a producer of these products, right, I have seen these and I'm like, I want to know what those unknowns are, right? Tell me what those unknowns are. And I want to know, one, are they toxic? Are they harmful? Are they impurities that we shouldn't include? And two, is this the next HHC? Is this the next THCV? Is this the next cannabinoid that everybody and their brother is going to talk about for the rest of time? And we're going to take it from being a minor to being a major, whether we're breeding it into the plant or we're learning how to create it using natural product synthesis pathways so that we can have more of it, because wow, we just revolutionized The appetite suppression market, for instance, okay, which is huge in the US. I don't know about the rest of the world, but I feel like a lot of people are like, please give me a pill that will make me less fat, right? We could talk about those kinds of things. We could talk about pain management. We could talk about anxiety management, right? And the plant itself, now we can talk about these things. We can talk about commercializing them. We can talk about the synergies between existing environments, right? The dietary supplement industry, right? The burgeoning and like charging forward cannabis, high THC industry, and all, it's, millions of consumers, right? There are opportunities there for us, while also acknowledging that first, figure out what these compounds are, then figure out what they do, then figure out if what they do is valuable, then commercialize those products. And the only way we get there is if we're all working together from the same set of rules, which right now we don't really have.
And Catherine, just to follow up on that one, I love that we are getting to that point, that we are studying, we are getting that research done, and that we are being synergistic as cannabis and hemp. Darwin had a great point. We are not in the marijuana or hemp industry. We are in the cannabinoid product industry. And that it behooves all of us on both sides to engage in the research and ensure public safety in these products that we are developing. And to Elena's points, for the regulatory side of things, that's a whole nother conversation in a future webinar. I'll let Scott kind of queue up the future one, but that one will be an extremely interesting conversation as well.
I think even beyond there, when we consider right now, the regulatory landscape is changing, right? It's different state by state. And it's changing because we had, almost 100 years of prohibition over this sacred plant, right? And the plant was valuable for so many more reasons, right? Whether as a food source or a fuel source or a paper source or a building material or, textiles, right? And now, we're really looking at the botanical origins of the medicinal products, and also looking at, just like we look at, by the way, things like corn, which makes so many other things in our commercial environment as a commodity. The cannabis sativa L plant can do so much more. And looking at the minor and novel cannabinoids, looking at it as a source outside of petroleum for us to create other things, right? Other fuels, other downstream, products that right now we're only being able to create really from corn, because there's excess corn in the United States anyway, right? Or from petroleum products. So, the dinosaurs and the plants that they ate, right? Like that's what we're talking about. But if we could do that instead with something that is a bioaccumulator, that is mostly drought stable, that requires very little, continuous agricultural monitoring compared to many other plants out there, right? That lives in environments where other plants perhaps cannot live. Maybe not the best survival rate, but still it's possible for it to live in lots of unhospitable locations, right? I mean, the ability for us to be able to take the sacred plant and expand it into, cannabinoid production environments and beyond, right? Right now, what people have done with the abundance of CBD, and let's be real, the abundance of CBD, because of a lack of commercial outlets for a product that everybody knew was going to be valuable, led to how many other amazing commercially available cannabinoids that we did not have 10 years ago. 10 years ago, if you wanted to do research with THCV, it was going to cost you tens of thousands of dollars, and you're probably going to be limited to a few hundred grams. And today you can buy kilos. That wouldn't have happened without the change in law. And it wouldn't have happened without like all of the scientists coming together and saying, hey, let's commercialize these products and do it as quickly as possible, right? So some of the research that we're able to do now wasn't even on the table before because there was a lack of available resources to do it with. Like, man, I can remember when getting CBN, it was always contaminated with a million other things, and I could never really trust the isolation of it. And now I can buy bioreacted, enzymatically clean CBN, fresh, right, for the cheap. And when I say the cheap, I mean like I could afford to buy a kilo myself without having to have any sponsorship.
It's pretty wild how far
it's so wild.
It's pretty wild how far things have come in recent years. And with the changing regulatory landscape and with the changes in our knowledge of these compounds, it's really informed. I think consumers are more educated, and manufacturers are more educated and more able to meet those consumer needs. So to John and also to James, we've talked about some of these compounds from a manufacturer's perspective. How does it make sense to kind of bucket up these compounds together? And what might manufacturers be looking at for good candidates for compounds that they would be interested in? John, would you like to share?
Sorry, go ahead, John.
Well, yeah, I certainly think that the hemp and cannabis industry first need to understand that it's the same plant, and that they can coexist and mutually benefit each other. Because right now, a lot of the regulatory changes that are happening state by state can be negative towards, or are negative towards hemp, because of this lack of understanding, and this competitive fear, et cetera. But if we get past that, I think the hemp industry does offer a lot of advantages to the cannabis industry. It acts as just the retail products themselves are kind of a pathway to the canna curious. It's less intimidating than a lot of the regulated, cannabis, retail stores that are out there. The inputs are significantly cheaper, to Cason's point, as far as just having CBD, CBG available in isolated form, full spectrum. I mean, and when you're growing acres, hundreds, thousands of acres of this, the biomass and the extraction capabilities and the conversion capabilities are just miles ahead of this very highly regulated and very controlled cannabis side of things. So from an R&D perspective, hemp is definitely there. Like we do all of our R&D. We have both cannabis and hemp. All of our R&D is on the hemp side, right? So because we can manufacture D9 distillate from hemp for under $1,000 a kilo, right? The cannabis market here in Illinois, that same liter of D9 distillate derived from cannabis is 15 grand. Which one are you going to work with, right? And same with THCV. I mean, all these things. I mean, it just really it lends itself to hemp and being able to do research much faster. The loosened regulatory component allows you to fail much faster than on the cannabis side, right? Because you can it's very hard to do R&D on the cannabis side. Anyway, James.
I'll kick it in from the cannabis point of view. While there's nothing I would love more than to be able, as a manufacturer of product, to lower my cost of THC per milligram down to pennies or next to nothing, which absolutely we'd love to do, there's a reason that it's a highly regulated industry. There's absolutely a reason. Intoxicating compounds are dangerous to widely consume. I would say dangerous with big asterisks here, but it's a simple matter of, this is an intoxicating product. And to your point, Scott, if we're going to bucket it, we need to bucket it as intoxicating and non-intoxicating. And to Cassin's point, we need to determine what that is and at what levels and in what situations, what drug interactions. We absolutely are good. We are the front line of this industry. We are the first to do this in a big way. We're the first to openly talk about this. And if we go about this haphazardly, we're going to get egg on our face. I truly believe we're one molecule away of discovering something that will absolutely kill people. It's a matter of one twist of a molecule, one little invention, and we have another vape gate on our crisis, which didn't help either of us, marijuana or hemp. It pushed everybody backwards. And that's the risk we're really looking at. I'm going to avoid getting into too much regulatory chat here, because I do work here in Colorado on the Intoxicating Hemp Task Force and with the governor actively right now trying to get a bill passed that addresses not only the public health and safety aspect, not only the testing and labeling requirements, which are needed, which are so essential. Do I think we're overregulated? Absolutely. Absolutely will. I think that we are overregulated to the nines, and I believe there's a lot of influence from outside groups that come into both hemp and cannabis space to push GMP, or not to push GMP in a negative way, but to push their consulting, to push their personal prerogatives. And if we look at this as a unified bridge approach, we are, like John said, absolutely going to be buying our CBN, our CBG, CBC, all that stuff from hemp processors and resellers. But the buckets we need to look at is this intoxicating? And that gets to the heart of why we're having this issue to begin with, is because the Delta 8 loophole that was gratuitously exploited by bad actors seeking to divert out of the legal system because they didn't want to play by the rules, first off. And two, they wanted to sell it to a bigger marketplace, which is underaged and unage gated kind of things. Not saying anyone in this room is. That has put a bad spin on this to where we need to speak out as a unified force, study together, work together on these compounds, on this progress and on this development to address those things. But when you come down to it, we're up against a very strong lobby. It's called pharma. And as soon as we have started stepping on their toes on pain relief, on anxiety, on pills that are traditionally marketed and make billions of dollars of revenue a year, we're facing an uphill fight, and they will use any of these devices and any of these angles to divide us, because division leads to their victory. So in my conclusion, I love being on this. I love working with this, and I'm excited to speak at NCIA Lobby Days next week in person with the hemp committees, to the Senate Ag Committee, to these lawmakers, and say, look, we're coming to this for you together with options, with directions that lead to positive development. There could be a compound within this that not only kills, like Darwin said, THC acetate could absolutely kill somebody. There could be another compound that, I'm not going to make any product function claims, but could help Alzheimer's or Parkinson's disease. And if we slam the door on that right now, one way or another, we're never going to be able to reach that conclusion and find the ultimate potential of this plant.
You know, I see a lot of questions that are all asking about the legality and, you know, the labeling and disclosures on some of these intoxicating hemp-derived cannabinoids, and totally agree. I mean, I was down in Springfield, Illinois 2 days ago lobbying, and I'll be in DC with James next week lobbying, you know, for this very thing. Like, regulatory certainty is an absolute for the hemp industry for sure, right? And there are bad actors out there. So, but there's good actors too. I know almost every hemp company I know actually follows, you know, loosely the cannabis rules. They do the third-party testing and batch testing. They do the proper labeling and disclosing. They have the child-proof packaging. They have all these various things very similar to the cannabis industry. So not everyone is a bad actor in the industry, right? So
agreed. I think to allude to that. I think there's some wonderful actors that are doing a lot of good for a lot of people. I really honestly do. I love, you know, a lot of your groups, Charlotte's Web, people who really care that they want to help people and they are following those rules. And I think that we can bring all that together. Again, DC and lobbying. Yeehaw. Sorry.
Next week, woo!
Next
Love
week.
to see you all there. I feel like there's a number of other questions here. Do we want to try to hit on them? I feel like we answered the question about terpenes and flavonoids. You know, yes, those exist. Yes, we need to do research. Yes, we have excellent anecdotal information that's available to us now because we have been commercializing these products. It's just not, we're not there yet, right? We had federal prohibition, which preventing us from looking at the commercial application of these compounds. That is no longer there in some cases. And so we can look at these things in a different way. We have known about these products since the 40s in a clinical academic sense. Being able to understand how we can apply that science to make a commercial product that is safe for a consumer. And when I say safe, I mean safe the way a consumer usually thinks of products as being safe. As in, you go to the grocery store, you buy something off the shelf, it tells you how to take it, you take it and it performs the way you expect it to perform. That's what I mean, right? Whether it's a dietary supplement or it's coming out of the pharmacy, or you're going into the frozen food aisle and you're buying a microwavable bag of pasta with cheese sauce and broccoli on it, right? As a consumer, you expect that when you open that bag, it's going to have pasta with cheese sauce and broccoli on it, and that you microwaved it for 3 minutes, and then when you were done microwaving it for 3 minutes, it was consumable, and that you didn't get sick. These are your normal, in the United States, consumer expectations. And we are at a point in our industry where we can say, okay, we're ready to commercialize these products, to create products that do what the label says it's going to do, that perform the way the label says it's going to perform consistently. So when I bought it last week and it was a bag of pasta with broccoli and cheese sauce, and I bought the same thing this week, it was still a bag of pasta with broccoli and cheese sauce, right? Like these are the things that we expect as consumers in the US, right? That's what we're talking about here. The next steps for that would be, hey, we have new, novel, minor, we have completely new synthetics that are available. How can we be certain they're going to affect every person the same way? We're not unless we do the work. And that's the heavy lifting that we're talking about. You know, so when Alina asks, why aren't we fully characterizing products? So first we weren't allowed to. Now we can, right? After the MMR was signed last year, now we can do this work. We can, as individual private citizens, as long as we're working with a accredited institution, do this kind of work. We can get permission to do the clinical trials, and people are starting to do it already. You know, over the last 30 years, there were 6 clinical trials related to products like this. Since the MMR was passed, there's over 60, okay? And that's in the last 5 months. Are we doing the work? Sure. Is it too little, too late? Yeah, it definitely feels like it. Are we behind other countries around the world? Yes, we are. Will we catch up? I think American ingenuity and all the crazy things that my hemp brothers and sisters are out there doing right now to push this envelope, I think we are going to get there. Will there be obstacles along the way? 100%. Will some people feel uncomfortable with the changes that we make? Yes. And remember, some of those people are uncomfortable with cannabinoids in general, regardless of where they come from or what they're going to be used for, right? So we really should be considering that, you know, broader about all of these other questions here, like, hey, will the government regulate these things? Yeah. Are they going to regulate it on a cannabinoid basis is Heidi's question. 100%. Why do we know that? Because everything else in the United States commercial consumer products is regulated on a product by product basis, whether it's a commodity or a subset of a commodity, they're all regulated that way. That's just how it is. We cannot expect that the cannabis industry will not be regulated in that same way. If you create a new product and it comes out on the market, the regulators will come in and regulate your new product. That is like, I don't know, the American way, perhaps. We just absolutely love red tape. Like that's just how it is, right? When we start talking about, I just kind of want to make sure we get a chance to look at all of these since we're coming up on the hour, guys. I really feel like there are some other items in here regarding good manufacturing practices and regarding, hey, how can we actually look at the work that's already been done and know if things are positively impacting people? Anecdotally, in our industry, before we ever got to where we are today, we knew that this plant was helping people. Being able to quantify how it's helping people, being able to make sure that it continues to help people while minimizing the harms and increasing accessibility so more people can be helped. That is the goal, right? And why is that the goal, right? It's both profitable and it reduces the suffering of people all over our country, if not the world. Like that is why we want to do it. Right? That's like why we're here. I'm sure there might be people who are like, no, I want everyone in the world to suffer and I'm going to create the product that's going to make them suffer. And those people who really love suffering are going to buy it. But in general, most people are like, please reduce my suffering. And that's really what we're trying to do here. Right? I feel like that kind of covers most of the other questions. Guys, does anybody else really feel like one of these questions is burning a hole in your heart and it needs to be answered like vigorously?
I would echo some of what Lloyd I'm seeing is saying about good manufacturing processes, responsible labels testing. So when I talk about the various buckets that we can put these compounds into and intoxicating versus non-intoxicating, I agree 100% with James that from a regulatory approach and with Darwin, that from a regulatory approach, we need a concrete fundamental way that we can simply look at compounds, label them, and have a use case that's going to work for 80% of the time in a simple way. But as the industry matures and evolves, I think consumers are going to get more savvy, and it's useful to be able to talk about things like Luke is talking about with isolated terpenes driving how the subjective experience of taking these compounds works, or kind of back to the other example, THCV lessening the activity of THC. So I think those are things that consumers and the industry needs to be aware of, but it's probably beyond the scope of what we can expect from our current legislature. But yeah, so I would agree that with Luke or with Lloyd that licensing, we should not be ignoring bad label and impurities. In the last webinar that we talked about, that was specifically a topic that we highlighted of in many cases, the industry can do better to characterize these compounds, and consumers would be served well by efforts in that area.
Hey, Scott, and just to cue this up as we're wrapping up here, these are some great topics for a couple future webinars, and I'll let Brian plug the future webinars, but I know that we're going to be jumping on these issues much more in depth in the future as well.
Yeah, we have one on labeling and testing and how those labels are presented. And we have one specific to good manufacturing processes, producing things safely, safe for consumers, safe for workers, as part of this series. So there is an opportunity to expand on these items as well.
Yeah, exactly. That was a perfect way, I think, to tie everything together. Like I said at the beginning of the hour, this is only the second of a 5-part series that these 3 committees have been working on really, really hard over the last few months, and doing the real work to incorporate all of this new information as it comes along. I really appreciate you all taking the time today to present this Meet the Miners session. I think this, along with our introductory defining the conversation, has really set the stage to have a more in-depth conversation in session 2, 3, 4, and 5, specifically focusing on testing, like you just mentioned, Casson. And then that session is already scheduled. That will be later this week or later this month. We're taking a break from this series for our 11th annual Cannabis Industry Lobby Days next week, but we will be getting back to this in earnest with this session taking place on Wednesday, May 24th at 1 p.m. Eastern. If you're interested in attending this session, I will be sending direct email invites to everyone that has been participating in session 1 and 2 as well. But let me know. Feel free to follow the link in the PDF presentation that you'll be getting after today's program to keep us updated and sign up for NCIA's Events Digest newsletter. And then additionally, sessions 4 and 5 have already been outlined and sketched out. We're working with our panelists and committees to increase the participation here with these sessions, and we're hoping to have these scheduled across June, potentially early July. So stay on the lookout for these as they're announced and will be posted on NCIA's website, our social media outlets, and then distributed to all of you all via email as well. And then last but not least, sort of just to tie this all together, as many of the panelists were mentioning, most of the panelists here and a number of our committees, committee members will be joining us for our 11th annual Cannabis Industry Lobby Days, kicking off next week on May 16th with a welcome reception taking place right down in the wharf, followed by 2 days of in-depth in-person meetings across Capitol Hill and multiple educational and networking events featuring our congressional champions and a special educational briefing surrounding the Safe Banking Act on the 18th that's going to be hosted on Capitol Hill. So if you are currently an NCIA member, please do take into consideration if you have any miles or some opening in your calendar and you haven't signed up yet, we will still be offering registration for this event through the end of tomorrow evening. If you are one of the people at the beginning of the call that indicated you are not currently an NCIA member, but might be in the East Coast or the DMV area, please do follow the links that will be posted here at the conclusion of the program to learn more about how you can link into this amazing event and support NCIA via membership and participation with all of our upcoming educational activities as well. We hope to see you in DC for that. And then, yeah, last but not least, just a huge thank you and shout out to Scott, Casson, James, and John for leading today's program and working with all of the various members of this multi-committee collaboration to develop this conversation. Darwin, who was posting a lot in the chat room throughout the conversation, has been instrumental in defining the 3rd, 4th, and 5th sessions in particular. And Paul Coble from Thallo Technologies has been very instrumental in sort of keeping us all on track and making sure that all of the various perspectives offered by the different committees are heard and incorporated to this important conversation. I really appreciate all of you all in the audience for joining us today, continuing your participation with our interactive educational programming. We look forward to seeing you for a future NCIA Industry Essentials webinar, hopefully the next one in this series on May 24th. I think our panelists are going to leave the virtual stage while we leave you with this end of event credit sequence that highlights the 40+ member businesses that supported NCIA's Industry Essentials and Cannabis Caucus events over the last 5 months, all leading into and culminating with our 11th annual Cannabis Industry Lobby Days next week. So thank you all. We'll see you all again next time and look forward to seeing all of you all, or as many of you all as we can in DC next week. Thank you all. We'll see you again.
Bye, everyone.